Lieutenant James Carter crouched low behind a jagged outcrop of alien stone, his pulse steady despite the chaos unfolding around him. The distant hum of Zarvok patrol ships droned through the acrid air, their searchlights cutting through the dense fog that clung to the war-torn landscape of Draxos 9. The mission had been simple: observe, report, and exfiltrate. Yet, as with most things involving the Zarvok warlords, simplicity had been an illusion. His visor displayed the data he had risked his life to obtain: battle formations, supply routes, and the true scale of the warlords' fleet. Information that could turn the tide of the war. He tapped his wrist console, encrypting the transmission before linking to the secure Terran military channel. The message pulsed out in silence, a single beacon against the void. Then the shadows shifted. Carter reacted on instinct, diving sideways as a razor-thin energy net snapped through the space where he had crouched moments before. The impact of his roll sent dust spiraling into the air, but he was already moving, reaching for his sidearm. A blur of motion caught his eye. 3 Zarvok warriors emerging from the mists, their massive frames armored in gleaming carapace. The lead one, nearly 8 feet tall, bared jagged teeth as he lunged forward. Carter fired. The plasma round struck true, punching into the alien's shoulder with a burst of superheated flesh. The warrior staggered, but did not fall. Behind him, the other 2 were already closing in, net launchers primed. Carter had faced death before. He had fought on the burning plains of Echelon, watched cities crumble on the rim worlds, survived the orbital sieges of New Kyoto. But this was different. The Zarvok were not just conquerors, they were butchers, leaving nothing but charred bones and shattered ruins in their wake. A second net shot out. This time, he wasn't fast enough. The impact sent a jolt through his body as the web of energy constricted, shorting out his neural interface and locking his limbs in place. He hit the ground hard, his breath leaving him in a sharp gasp. The Zarvok warlord loomed over him, the wound in his shoulder already sealing. The alien sneered, reaching down to grip Carter's armor with clawed fingers. "Human," the warlord rumbled, lifting him effortlessly. "You should not have come here." The world tilted as he was hauled upward, his body unresponsive. His visor flickered, warning messages flashing before his eyes, but none of them mattered. The mission was complete. The message had been sent. Darkness swallowed him. Cold metal against his back. The sterile scent of recycled air. The distant hum of machinery. Carter's eyes flickered open, his vision adjusting to the dim light of the chamber. He was restrained, thick bands of alloy binding his wrists and ankles against a sloped interrogation slab. The Zarvok warship. A slow breath, steadying. Panic was useless. He took stock. His weapons were gone, along with his wrist console. The neural dampeners in the restraints left his limbs sluggish, but his mind remained sharp. The heavy doors groaned open, and High Warlord Tal entered. Even among his kind, Tal was massive. His battle-scarred exoskeleton bore the deep crimson etchings of rank, his armor adorned with the skulls of fallen enemies. Twin, glowing eyes studied Carter with cold amusement as he stepped forward, the metal plates of his boots clanking against the floor. "You are far from your homeworld, human," Tal mused, circling him. "Do you know where you are?" Carter met his gaze without flinching. A Zarvok warship, presumably in orbit above Draxos 9. His voice was even controlled. He would not give them the satisfaction of fear. Tal's lips curled in something resembling a smirk. "Clever. Your kind always is." He stopped, placing one clawed hand against the control panel beside the slab. The restraints tightened. "You were transmitting. To whom?" Carter let silence settle between them. Tal exhaled through his nostrils, the sound like smoldering embers. "No matter. We will extract what we need soon enough." The warlord turned to the side as another figure entered. A Zarvok interrogator, her thin, segmented frame draped in a flowing dark robe. A mind weaver. Carter tensed. Mind weavers were not torturers in the conventional sense. They did not need blades or fire. They reached into memories, plucked out secrets like ripened fruit, and left their victims as hollow husks. He had seen the results firsthand. The weaver approached, placing long fingers against his temple. A whisper of a sensation crawled against the edge of his consciousness, a spectral presence seeking a way in. And then the alarms blared. The sudden wail of klaxons shattered the moment, red warning lights flooding the chamber. Tal spun toward the control panel, his claws striking across the interface. A distorted voice crackled over the intercom in the warlord's guttural tongue, urgent, frantic. Carter smiled. He had sent more than just a distress signal. He had sent a warning. And the Zarvok had just received their answer. Tal's claws tapped impatiently against the control panel as the alarm howled through the chamber, an eerie red glow flashing in time with its pulse. The Mind Weaver hesitated, her elongated fingers retracting from Carter's temple as confusion flickered across her features. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. The warlord's patience snapped. He struck the intercom with his fist. Report. A garbled response came through the speakers, thick with static and panic. Tal growled, his mandibles clicking in irritation. He turned to Carter, eyes narrowing as the realization sank in. The human was smiling. What did you do? Tal demanded, his voice a low, rumbling growl. Carter tilted his head, feigning innocence. I sent a message. Tal's claws tightened into a fist, but before he could strike, a new sound filled the chamber, one far more ominous than the alarm. It was a transmission, crackling through the ship speakers, replaying Carter's last words before his capture. If you're receiving this, it's already too late. The chamber fell into silence. Even the Mind Weaver, usually a detached observer, took a slow step back. The recording continued, Carter's voice calm, measured, and deliberate. This is Lieutenant James Carter, Terran Recon. Captured behind enemy lines. Location, Zarvok-controlled sector, Draxos 9. Standard protocol dictates retrieval, but I've activated a secondary failsafe, Project Revenant. You know what that means. A deep, guttural murmur rippled through the ship's comms. Tal's eyes darted to the nearest control panel, his talons skimming across holographic displays. The bridge officers were already sifting through databases, pulling up records, searching for confirmation of what they had just heard. And then they found it. The room's main holoscreen lit up with historical footage, grainy surveillance clips, intercepted distress calls, and the cold, unrelenting aftermath of Terran retaliation efforts across the galaxy. The Zarvok, for all their brutality, were not ignorant. They had encountered human forces before. They had won battles against them, had raised colonies, had taken prisoners. But never had they taken a high-value Terran operative alive. And never had they provoked Project Revenant. The screen shifted, displaying a planet known as Velos 6. Once a thriving war camp of the Razan Dominion, it was now a wasteland, charred ruins stretching as far as the scanners could reach. The fleet stationed there had not just been defeated, it had been erased. The same pattern followed across multiple worlds. Every faction that had ever taken a Terran operative hostage had met the same fate. No warnings. No negotiations. No survivors. Tal's breathing grew heavier. His officers exchanged wary glances, their war-hardened discipline cracking beneath the weight of what they now faced. Lies, one of them muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Carter let out a slow, deliberate chuckle. You think so? His tone was mocking, but not unkind. He could see it, the way the seed of doubt had already taken root in their minds. These creatures, these conquerors, had never known fear the way humans did. They crushed, they burned, they dominated. But now, for the first time, they stood on the other side of the equation. A second transmission followed, one not of his own making. It was Terran. A deep, emotionless voice rang through the comms, speaking Galactic common in clipped, efficient tones. This is Admiral Elias Voss of the Terran Retribution Fleet. You have taken what is ours. You have one opportunity to return the human unharmed. If you refuse, you forfeit your right to exist. Silence. The Mind Weaver turned to Tal, her translucent eyes unblinking. We must release him. Tal bared his teeth. You would have us kneel to these soft bloods? The Mindweaver's gaze did not falter. They are not soft, and they do not bluff. Carter watched the warlord's muscles tense, a storm raging behind his cold, reptilian eyes. His kind did not surrender. They did not bow, did not retreat, did not yield to threats. And yet he saw it. The indecision. The first cracks in the foundation of his confidence. "Admiral," one of the bridge officers interrupted, voice hoarse with barely restrained panic. Multiple ships dropping from hyperspace. The holoscreen updated in real time. Dark, angular shapes materialized along the edges of the Zarvok fleet, their sleek black hulls absorbing the faint light of Draxos 9's twin moons. They did not move aggressively. They did not fire. They simply arrived, an unspoken promise of annihilation. Carter leaned back against a slab, his restraints forgotten in the shifting tides of power. "You should listen to her," he murmured, nodding toward the Mindweaver. "I know your kind. You believe fear is a weapon. But humans, we use it differently." Tal's breath was ragged now, his mind calculating possibilities. If he killed Carter, there would be no bargaining. If he released him, he would lose face among the warlords. But if he did nothing, the comms crackled again. 10 minutes. A countdown began flashing on every screen in the chamber. The warlord's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Carter thought he might choose to fight, to let his pride drag the entire ship into oblivion. But then, something shifted in Tal's expression. The animalistic fury remained, but beneath it, a colder, more pragmatic realization settled in. Without another word, he turned sharply, barking orders in his native tongue. The guards hesitated for only a moment before moving to release Carter's restraints. The cold metal snapped open, and sensation rushed back into his limbs. As he pushed himself up, rubbing circulation into his wrists, Tal spoke without looking at him. "You walk out of this chamber alive, human. But do not mistake this for mercy." Carter rolled his shoulders, testing his mobility. "Oh, I wouldn't dream of it." Tal's burning gaze finally met his. "Your kind fights like beasts, but you negotiate like demons." Carter smirked. "That's the idea." The warship trembled as the Terran fleet drew closer. Carter stepped off the Zarvok warship's boarding ramp with measured confidence, his boots meeting the cold, metallic floor of the Terran flagship, indomitable. The shift in atmosphere was immediate. Gone was the oppressive heat of his captor's vessel, replaced by the sterile precision of human engineering. Cool, controlled, and brimming with quiet menace. A squad of Terran Marines stood at attention, their matte black armor gleaming under the artificial lights. Behind them, Admiral Elias Voss waited, his hands clasped behind his back, expression unreadable. He was an older man, his face carved from years of war, his posture rigid with the discipline of someone who had seen too many battles end in blood. Carter exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in his muscles begin to ease. He had made it back. Barely. "Lieutenant," Voss greeted, his voice even, but beneath it lurked something dangerous. "You took your time." Carter smirked despite himself. Had to make an impression. The Admiral's piercing gaze flicked past him, toward the Zarvok warship still lingering in Indomitable's shadow. The alien vessel, so imposing only hours ago, now seemed almost fragile in comparison. It was an animal that had learned, for the first time, that it was no longer the apex predator. "You sent a hell of a message," Voss murmured, his tone betraying nothing. Carter knew what he meant. He hadn't just relayed intelligence. He had started something. The Zarvok were ruthless, but they weren't suicidal. They had released him. Yes, but only because they understood the alternative. That knowledge would spread. Fear would do the rest. "You'd disapprove," Carter noted. Voss studied him, as if weighing how much to say. Then finally he sighed. "I've been in this war long enough to know that once you make something afraid of you, it never stops looking for ways to kill you." Carter understood the warning. Fear was a weapon, but a volatile one. The Zarvok wouldn't forget what happened today. And the next time they faced humanity, they wouldn't hesitate. "I'll take my chances," Carter said, rolling the stiffness from his shoulders. A flicker of something like amusement passed through Voss's eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He turned sharply on his heel. "Come with me. You need a debrief, a medical check, and a damn good meal." Carter fell into step beside him, the Marines moving in formation behind them. The air in Indomitable carried the familiar scent of polished steel, engine coolant, and something that almost felt like home. He hadn't realized how much he had missed it. As they walked, the comms crackled again. A voice from one of the bridge officers filtered through. "Admiral, the Zarvok warship is retreating. Should we pursue?" Voss glanced at Carter. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Carter shook his head. "No," Voss answered finally. "Let them run. They need to spread the word." The channel went silent. Carter exhaled, the weight of the past hours settling over him like a cloak. He had survived. But the war was far from over. And as he followed Voss toward the command deck, he knew one thing for certain. The galaxy had just learned what happened when you took a Terran prisoner. And it would never make that mistake again.